Hey up everybody, welcome back to the Audio Cycling YouTube channel, where today I'm going to be talking about the Velogames Vuelta San Juan. This is the next round of the Velogames warm-up series, and hopefully your Velogames Tour Down Under is going well. If it isn't, hopefully we can rectify that today and get you some points in this competition. When you look at the riders, what we'll see is that Remco Evenepoel is 22 points, and this is certainly something which I want to talk about, considering that a lot of the riders in this race, even for me, are relatively unknown and I don't really know who they are. I think something else that would be interesting to talk about is the dynamic of whether you should include GC riders into your team, because if you've seen my preview, which if you haven't, go check it out, what you will see is that there's a lot of sprinter stages in this race. Of the 7 stages, more than likely 5 or 6 of them are going to end in a sprint. There's only one mountain top finish up the Alto Colorado or something like that. So therefore, the GC riders are only going to really have one day to score points. Now, if you get the right rider, you could end up in a scenario where they get 150 points for that stage win. They get 300 for winning, which means they have 450 plus some assist points. They might get up to somewhere just over 500 points, which if you're, say, Evenepoel, it's not as good value as, say, somebody like Sam Bennett at 12, who's going to be competing in 5 or 6 sprints and possibly picking up, considering the calibre of the sprinters in this race, he could be picking up 100 points at least a day, and also being high up in the GC until that high altitude finish. So it makes me really wonder whether the GC riders are worthwhile picking. If you could find a cheap one, I certainly think they'll be worthwhile. But when you have the likes of Evenepoel, Higuita and Lopez, those are the premier sort of GC riders, is it really worthwhile putting them on, considering that they're only going to be contesting in one stage? That's going to be something to bear in mind as I go through these riders. So, of course, Evenepoel, he's 22. Likely the favourite going into this race, considering that he has won it before. There's no time trial for him to gain a big advantage over some of the purer climbers, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Evenepoel certainly arrives with a decent squad. He's got Jan Hurt here to help him out, and I certainly think that Evenepoel would be one of the favourites to win this race. At 22, it's just a matter of whether he's worth it for the reasons I've just mentioned. Higuita at 18, I think, is probably on the tier sort of below Evenepoel in terms of favourites. He's got a very strong kick, and I think at the end of that climb, if Higuita is there, he would have a better chance of winning from a sprint. And Higuita, as a Colombian, he's very used to these high altitude finishes. So I think that Higuita would be a good one, and he will get assist points probably from the likes of Sam Bennett as the sprint stages go on as well. Fabio Jakobsen at 16, I think, is somebody you have to put on, considering that he is one of the 2 main sprinters, I think, in this race alongside Sam Bennett. Jakobsen should really be winning at least, I think, 2 stages in this race, considering the strength of his lead-outs. So one that you almost certainly have to put on is Jakobsen. Lopez, kind of similar to Higuita, will do well on that high altitude finish, and I personally think could win this race, considering that he'll have a lot more motivation to do so. And I think that Lopez is probably a good pick, could certainly pick up, at least maybe 400 points, possibly. Of course, he doesn't have the advantage of Higuita and Jakobsen in that there is no sprinter on his team to be accumulating assist points throughout the week as well. So he will lose out there a little bit. Dani Martinez, probably the strongest rider for the Ineos Grenadiers, but suffers for the same reason as all the other ones. Will only contest for one stage. There's also multiple leaders in the Ineos Grenadiers camp, so it's not a certainty that he is the leader. It's just a hunch that he probably would be the most suited. Egan Bernal is coming back from his road from injury, so let's see what he's going to do. I wouldn't expect too much, so in all honesty, I'd avoid Bernal just because it's very uncertain as to what he's going to do. Gaviria at 14, again, another very strong sprinter, probably a top 5 sprinter in this race, so I'd say that you have to pick him too. Sam Bennett at 12, I think you have to pick him. He's probably going to be one of the best value for money riders in this race, in my opinion. So Bennett, I think you have to put onto the team, considering that he also has a strong lead out. Ganna has done well in GC in the past in this race in 2020. I think he came top 5 or something like that. But again, no time trial for him to be using. But Ineos are looking very strong, so they'll probably win team classification. So that's worthwhile mentioning, considering that they'll get 30 points each for the team classification at the end of the week. Nizzolo's pretty good at 12. I think that he's probably one of the strongest 12-pointers alongside Bennett, considering that he should be contesting most of the sprints and possibly coming, I'd say, top 5, maybe some top 3s in there as well. Arno Rubio, strongest GC rider for Movistar. How do I think he's going to go? Probably a top 10 in all honesty. I think that he showed some good flashes last year of some good kind of progression in his career, and I think that I'd expect him to definitely be inside the top 10 in this race. So therefore he'll get up somewhere around 200 to 300 points more than likely. Sagan is another good sprint option. Although he has waned perhaps in the last couple of years, he is still going to be one of the strongest sprinters in this race, and therefore you have to put him onto your team pretty much. Oscar Sevilla, he'll be working for Lopez more than likely. 10 pointers, Jan Hurt, he'll be a domestique. Navarez, I think will be a domestique as well. Quinn Simmons is a very interesting one because if you think back to last year, he contested quite a few of the mountains classifications. I remember Tirreno and Tour de Suisse specifically. So therefore, he does have this ability to climb quite well. And whether he will be the chosen sprinter, even though they do have Aberasturi isn't that much faster, in my opinion, than Quinn Simmons. So Simmons could be an interesting one who could contest some of the sprints, but also possibly contest the GC, considering that the climb isn't overly steep. He could certainly hang on to some of the GC riders, in my opinion. So I think Simmons could be a very interesting one. Van Poppel, probably the best sprint lead out man in the world, arguably. And he might get his own chances throughout the week. However, it's a bit risky considering that you're putting 10 points into a rider who you don't know is going to be contesting sprints himself. He's going to be the lead out man. Saying that, I do expect that as a lead out man, he'll probably pick up a few top 10s and maybe a top 5 or so in a couple of the sprints, just as a de facto lead-out man. Viviani at 10 is another cheap sprinter, although not the fastest, should certainly be picking up a few top 10s and a few top 5s throughout the week. Aberasturi, as I just said, is going to be a pretty fast sprinter. And now we're getting into some riders which I don't know, so we're just going to skip over ones I don't really know and talk about the ones I do know. Marco Brenner being one of them. He's probably the best GC option for DSM. I'm excited to see what he can do this year. Steph Kras, the best GC rider for Total Energies. He should be finishing inside the top 10 as well. And then we've also got perhaps Harold Tejada for Astana is the best GC choice for them. Antoine Tolhoek is another good one for Trek Segafredo. Kevin Van Marke could maybe go for GC. Sams Welsford is likely one of the best 8-pointers because he should be contesting quite a few of the sprints. He won a sprint of the Tour of Turkey last year ahead of the likes of Caden Groves and Jasper Philipsen, so he has the credentials to try and win some of these sprints. I'd expect him to pick up 1 or 2 top 3s throughout the week. Then moving into the 6-point riders, there's a few which I want to point out who I think are the best ones. But let's just pick out some other guys. You could say Gablai Zabir would be one. I remember last year at Tour de la Provence, he did quite well in GC up the Col de la Leur. Yeah, so he could certainly be a good one. Has gone quite well in the early season before, so watch out for him. Max Riqueze, who isn't the lead-out man for Gaviria this time, but instead rides as part of the Argentina national team. So whether he will sprint for himself or whether perhaps in some way he might end up being the lead-out man for Gaviria in some sense, I don't know. But if he's given his own opportunities, he should be finishing inside the top 10. And my favourite 6-point rider is Gleb Silitsa, who is the sprinter for Astana Kazakhstan. If you haven't heard of him, I'd probably forgive you because he has been quite unknown. But he is coming up the ranks relatively quickly and is the best sprinter on Astana. So I would be looking out for him to be picking up quite a few top 10s throughout the week. Stephen Williams would be a good choice as a GC rider, as a 6-pointer, considering that he won a stage of the Tour de Suisse last year. So watch out for him. Antle Zeitz could also be a potential GC rider for Astana. And then in terms of 4-point riders, we're really stretching the limits of my knowledge here. So we've got Jonas Wiederberg, who was in the lead of the KOM classification at Volta Catalunya in the first few stages last year, so maybe he might go in the break a few times. You got Alexander Konichev, who has joined Team Kolatech from Bike Exchange, so perhaps him. Giovanni Lonardi is the fastest sprinter for Aolo, so probably the safest 4-point rider to be choosing out of all of them. You could pick Peter Selly just for the GC like assist points and whatnot. Attilio Viviani, the brother of Elia Viviani, would be another safe sprint option from Team Kolatech. Should be picking up a handful of top 10s possibly in this race if things go his way. And that's about it, to be honest with you. I would recommend stacking up on sprinters and only picking 1 or 2 maximum GC riders. That's probably the best advice I can give you. Put your teams in the comments down below. I presume we'll all be looking at very similar teams, so it's going to be a pretty close affair. And all that is left to say is to stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!